Can God create a rock too heavy for him to lift? You've probably heard someone ask this question before, or perhaps you've even asked it yourself. Skeptics of Christianity tend to employ questions such as this because they seem on the surface to be gotcha moments for Christians. The traditional God of theism, more specifically identified as the triune Yahweh in Christian circles, is said to be omnipotent. That is, that he is all-powerful. But if he is all-powerful, can he commit an action, creating a rock too heavy for himself to lift, that would cause himself to be unable to commit a following action, lifting the rock? In this scenario, it seems that in some way God is unable to commit one or more of these two actions, and thus demonstrates that he is not omnipotent. The foundational claim by many Christians is that God is omnipotent, that he is all-powerful. And a classical definition of this term is that omnipotence means to be able to perform any task whatsoever. But there exist problems with this sort of definition. For example, an omnipotent being would then be able to create a married bachelor or a four-sided triangle. But those are contradictory ideas. This kind of being could even make himself non-omniscient, which is all-knowing, which also eliminates its omnipotence in the process. However, many philosophers of recent centuries have begun to reconsider the definition of omnipotence. The argument now stands by some that being omnipotent is not the ability to do any task whatsoever, but to do all that is logically possible. This refined definition preserves the coherence of omnipotence, whereas the former definition does not. And I would argue that Scripture never makes a case for God being able to commit every possible action. Rather, Scripture makes it clear that God cannot commit an action that is contrary to his own nature. For example, Numbers 23:19, Titus 1:2, and Hebrews 6:18 demonstrate that God cannot lie because it is a transgression of his perfectly moral character. Likewise, God cannot murder, steal, or blaspheme because those go against his very nature. The same then must be understood when asking philosophical questions like the one I've posted here. If God were to be able to create a rock too heavy for himself to lift, he would be transgressing his own character, for his own character is that of logic and coherency. God's nature is an established fact, which includes his ability to lift a rock, no matter how heavy. So it must follow logically that God cannot create a rock that is too heavy for himself to lift, for no such rock can exist logically. The same goes for a married bachelor or a four-sided triangle. The very nature of a married bachelor is that of a man who's not married, but married. So a married bachelor is a logical impossibility. Likewise, the nature of a triangle is that it is a three-sided shape. So a four-sided triangle is also a logical impossibility. These logical impossibilities are what we call philosophical absurdities. Those asking these kinds of heavy rock questions have one goal in mind. They wish to find logical incoherency within the reason and logic of the Christian. But they must assume a philosophical absurdity in order to even ask the question in the first place. If then I were to accept that the logical absurdity exists that God can create a rock too heavy for him to lift, I must then also assume the logical absurdity that God can lift it. The skeptic cannot expect me to suspend my disbelief in one logical absurdity in order to accept the other, for that is logical incoherency. The very thing skeptics believe disproves my entire position of believing God is omnipotent. In short, these kinds of questions, though they are asked in order to demonstrate the logical incoherency of Christians, must first accept logical incoherency in order to ask, and that, in my opinion, nullifies the question at their foundation.